So let me just try and do a little synthesis of what I heard through the day. And I got you off to a horribly depressing start with my discussion, exhorting you for all the reasons why the world has to be better, faster, cheaper, right? And also safer. And doing that work requires real dedication. And we're in the midst of, I think, perhaps the most exciting time in American healthcare. And I really do salute what you've done in this state to really improve the safety for the patients you serve. But we're against this backdrop of massive change. So we talked a bit about that to start off. And then Terry gave us a wonderful exposure to some of the inevitable system failures in healthcare, and really started and prefaced everything by the fact that most people, and certainly this is my experience in healthcare, there are no bad guys in healthcare, right? It's peopled by well-intentioned, well-trained folk who really desperately want to do the right things for patients. And we are all human. We can all make mistakes, which is doubly important given that we're in an industry that is more dangerous than bungee jumping, which I found terrifying to think about. And he exhorted us to embrace error, because that way we will learn from our mistakes. And we need to focus not just on error reduction, but on the reduction of harm. And I thought that was a really important distinction, because what it says to you is, like, it's not about flawless. It's about, let's make sure we focus on the things that could really make a difference, right? Things that would kill people or do great harm to them. And so I think that really is an important insight. And he gave us wonderful examples about how to think about that. I was really struck with a defibrillation example and just the important decay function of success rates, and something dumb like the on-off switch not really being sending the right signals. And if we can do it for projectors, why can't we do it for something so incredibly important? And fix the problem by redesigning the system rather than trying to punish people for errors that would, I mean, to me, that's an error waiting to happen, right? So let me just tell you a little personal story of how I relate to the patient safety movement. So I've worked over the years with a number of different hospital systems, and one of my old friends is Tom Prislak, who runs Cedars-Sinai in LA. And I've spoken at his board retreat. In fact, I'm on a schedule where they have me back every 5 or 10 years. You know, that's all you need a futurist for, every 5 or 10 years, right? Anyway, so I was speaking at a meeting in Palm Springs, and it was like this. And you know, I gave a talk, and then we had breakouts. And the night before, they had these amazing clinical scientists at Cedars who were doing all this amazing work in redesigning the future of medicine. You know, I remember one guy talking about they were going to do stem cell transplants to cure diabetes, right? I mean, amazing thing. And so there's all these benefactors on the board, right? It's a board retreat, and fancy Hollywood people with money. And they're saying, oh, you know what we should do? We should build a building for this. And I went through running around all the breakouts, and everywhere I went, they were saying, oh, we should build a building for this. So we're up to like 9 new buildings by the time of the end of the retreat. And I said, wait a second. Before we build a building, maybe we should invest in electronic health records, because, you know, they had just balked at the implementation of an EHR. And I said, you know, that might help with things like, you know, improving patient throughput and patient safety and stuff like that. I mean, this is many, many years ago. Well, 6 weeks later was the famous Dennis Quaid incident, if you recall that, where 2 kids were born at Cedars and given, and it's exactly what Terry talked about, you know, instead of getting the 10,000 to flush the line, they got the 10,000 to flush the line. Not good. Now, Cedars, to their great credit, handled it with great professionalism, you know, did the mea culpa, apologized, did the whole thing. And really, you know, mercifully, the children were not harmed, but is a classic example of what Terry's talking about, is a system mistake. And it turns out that they ended up, the parents, Dennis Quaid and his wife, ended up not suing Cedars, but suing Baxter, because it was an accident waiting to happen. So this is the funny part. Well, it's not really funny, but the part of the story is a couple of weeks after that, I ended up being invited back to Cedars to give a quality lecture in the wave of this thing. And then 2 weeks after that, was in a meeting with the head of Baxter. And I didn't know they had sued Baxter. I just knew that it had all been resolved. And I sort of said, I was telling this story to the guy, and he turned around and said, yeah, they sued us. And so it was kind of an awkward moment. We're both looking at our shoes and saying, awkward. Anyway, the point is, I think that's a classic story of an accident waiting to happen because of a system that is designed to fail. You would be, you're asking for trouble if that stuff exists. And I think what I took from Terry's whole presentation is designed for the reality of the operating environment. In other words, get real about this. Make sure you observe how people actually use stuff. I live in Silicon Valley, and I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of high-tech companies over the years, unrelated to healthcare. They put a lot of time and energy into sort of research, what they call ethnographic research, where they actually observe what people do with an iPhone, not what you think you might do with an iPhone if you're a designer. How do people actually do their work? And when you do that, you learn amazing things about what actually makes a difference in any process or in any system. And I think that's one of the key learnings. You are all experts, and your voice is really important in that redesign of the environment. And then we also need to have forcing functions in the design of these systems so that we can't make those mistakes, that it's built into the system that you can't press that button if you shouldn't press that button. And I think that is a real imperative for us to consider. But what I was a little frustrated about is, well, wait a second, not everybody on the front line can go and get Siemens to change the way they do stuff, right? I mean, you can be alert to this, but you really want to build in ways in which it can become actionable. And I think that is where the whole guideline checklist world comes in terms of creating mandatory pathways that people have to follow to get to the right answer. So that was a really important insight. And I think what Terry also told us is that you all, the people who are doing the work or supervising the people that actually do the work, know where the hazards are. You know the accidents waiting to happen. And that's why it's sort of incumbent that we all speak up and find a way to design our systems to be higher performing. And so Terry was very much on it's the system stupid that contribute to errors and quality and safety issues. And Josh was more on the people side. And I think it's not either or, I think it's both, and that was the big message from today. Too many people in any industry say, we've always done it that way, or I was trained at Hopkins and therefore it must be the right thing to do. Get over it, move on, is what he said, and I think that is wise advice. We also heard something that I probably knew given my background, that being fresh and sharp is better than being tired or drunk, right? I'm Scottish, I can tell you that is absolutely true. But he also really reiterated the notion of speak up, both positively and negatively. Speak up if you see something going wrong, and speak up in terms of praising people for doing the right thing. And I think that's an important lesson for us to learn. And the other thing that I took is that while it is important to develop pathways, you've got to be careful not to slip into writing dumb rules and expecting people to follow dumb rules. I'll give you a classic example. So I went to the school in Scotland in the 50s and late 50s and early 60s, high school. And the fashion at that time, you're all too young, but the fashion at that time in the late 50s were for drainpipe trousers, right? So the rebel boys would wear drainpipe trousers, meaning they were very tight. So the school rule was, as of 1958, that your trousers couldn't, at the pant leg, at the bottom, couldn't be more than 15 inches, right? 6 years later, the fashion was for flared trousers, right? The school rule was completely changed, so instead of being no less than 15 inches, it could be no more than 15 inches, right? I mean, that's kind of an example of dumb rules, that people are asked to follow. And I think what we need to do is have smart rules that encourage us to do the right thing and encourage us to fail safe on the side of safety. I think Josh had lots of great insights about the notion of communications, being open to that, of empowerment. We talked about the importance of people feeling that they have the right to speak up when they see something going wrong. And he really stressed this notion of walking the talk. I heard this a number of times in the breakouts too. When it's really important, I wrote a piece one time called CEO should stand for Chief Example Officer. People, particularly well-educated baby boomers and the many generations that follow, get it when people are not authentic, right? They have a nose for fakes like you wouldn't believe. And so if they see people not doing what they're being told to do, that really sends a powerful signal. So you really have to walk the talk if you're going to make a difference in moving the needle on quality. Be proactive, and that really requires people taking responsibility to speak up and talk about near misses. By the way, I mean, I was astonished at the statistic of 600 to 1 in terms of, I mean, by my crude calculation, that means if we're killing 100,000 a year, then there's 60 million events that are serious out there. I mean, if that number holds up, that's pretty amazing, and should be cause for us to be ever vigilant in this regard. We know the importance of teams. We know the importance of transparency. We know the importance of minimizing paperwork that Josh pointed to. And I think that's a particular concern. I mean, I've had the opportunity to work a couple of times with Atoga Wandi, and last time when we were talking about this whole issue of are we running into checklist fatigue, you know, checklists upon checklists upon checklists. And I hear that from caregivers in my rattling around the country, that while they're passionate about patient safety, they see this kind of cacophony of, if to use an orchestration term, of safety signals and checks that are almost overwhelming. And I think trying to find our way through the measurement and transparency issues without losing the principles that we're trying to drive for is really incredibly important. And I think this whole notion of situational awareness, I mean, if something doesn't look or smell right, that probably is a signal that you need to speak up and change the way you're doing stuff. Now, one of the things I think is really evident in the healthcare system right now is, and it's partly, as I said from my opening comments, is the pressure is on increasingly in institutions. And I think the other thing I heard from a number of the different breakouts and from Josh is that, you know, sometimes maybe the jobs are impossible. You know, you're asking people, and there was a wonderful example that came up through the course of the day where it would be physically impossible for the person whose job it was to take meals to patients could actually do effective hand washing and deliver the meals and still be warm. I mean, it just physically would not happen, could not happen. So that's obviously a misalignment of either the job description or the time involved. And I think we probably have examples like that over and over again, that in the aim of trying to be better, faster, cheaper, you know, people, the suits like me, telling folk that you end up doing things and designing work which is just physically impossible to accomplish. And I think that is a really important insight for you all to take back to your work and to your colleagues and say, look, we got to get serious about this. You can't wish away the fact that it takes a certain amount of time to do things, particularly if you don't change those processes. And then one final kind of set of comments really has to do with the behavioral aspects that Josh and Terry and others talked about, which is, you know, there is a natural distribution of people's willingness to engage in this stuff. I mean, I used the example from our physician surveys of believers versus resistors, and I sat in the surgical checklist discussion for some time, and, you know, there's a lot of resistance to this kind of stuff, particularly for some reason orthopedic surgery. I'm not clinical, but I would have thought orthopedic surgery was like the most industrializable thing going in medicine, and yet for some reason every orthopedic surgeon I've ever met thinks they're making Chippendale furniture or something. You know, it's like this artistic creation that can't be standardized. But anyway, that's just an aside. The other big message that came out of Terry's subgroup was this frustration with IT. And my one-liner about meaningless use. You know, look, all I can say about IT is what I said at the outset. No industry has ever transformed itself, in my experience, over the last 50 years if it's not on the back of IT. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you transform for higher reliability without using information technology. Now, I understand it's frustrating and it's not perfect, and it's partly because we are using, with all due respect to all the manufacturers who are all friends and clients of mine, we're using brain-dead legacy systems that are steam-driven, that are all based on mumps from the Mass General Hospital in 1968, right? I mean, it's not exactly contemporary cloud-based, web-based IT. However, it's all we've got, given all the other failures. And do not despair on this journey. You know, I was the keynote speaker at the rollout of Kaiser's electronic health record 4 times in the last 30 years, right? I mean, seriously, that's not a joke. That's an absolute serious statement. $7 billion later, they got it right. Now, I work with Kaiser groups, and I'll tell you, Kaiser doctors are more happy now and more proud of their work than I've ever seen them in my 25 years exposure. And it's largely because they have end-to-end connectivity with their patients, and they're doing amazing things using KP Connect, which is the Epic-based system that they've modified to treat patients and manage care. So I believe that's what we have to do. I believe this meaningless use phase will pass and we'll eventually get better at it, but I don't underestimate the difficulty in making that happen. And one of the things that came up is really in this last session or two is the sort of behavioral aspects. And, you know, let's be honest. Okay, it's all about systems. Most people are well-intentioned. There are some jerks out there. There are some very disruptive physicians. There may be disruptive nurses, maybe disruptive administrators who have bad attitudes. I mean, I remember doing some work at the Mayo Clinic a few years ago and sat with their leadership and tried to understand how they recruited people. And they described in excruciating detail the vetting process they went through. And at the end of a meeting of hearing all this, I said, oh, I've got it. You don't hire jerks. And they go, yeah, kind of. Jerks self-select out of here. You know, some flamboyant surgeon who bosses people around will not last more than 8 nanoseconds through this process. And so I think that's a really important learning, that there are often difficult people who maybe should be in some other line of work in another institution. I mean, that quite honestly to me is one of the conclusions we have to come to in institutions if we're really going to look ourselves in the mirror and say we're doing everything we can to make people and patients safe. So in summary, I'd just say I think it's about bringing the best of systems, of tools and technologies such as checklists and people together in a way that really honors the patients that we serve. And it's really about connection, care, and concern. I mean, I think the missing link in all of this is we've got to still bundle superior systems around the care and compassion that most of us look for. And I think, you know, just in closing the day, think of Lewis Blackman anytime you're looking after a patient, or the Lewis Blackman in your life, because that will make you focus on this work. It is incredibly important work. I salute you for your attention and spending time today, and wish you all well, and we'll see you in the morning, and have a wonderful evening, and thank you for your attention.